Friends, before I begin my sermon today, I want to give a little warning. I'm going to be sharing a story from my past that involves conversation about suicide. While I will be choosing my words carefully and will not be sharing lots of details, I want to be sensitive to the reality that for some of you, the conversation could be difficult. And so I will give fair warning when I enter into that story near the end of my sermon, so that if you need to tune out for that part, you may. Also, if you are or ever do struggle with suicidal thoughts, I beg you to please call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 and get the help you need. Today we continue our series on the book of Job. We took a break last week and now we come back to it. If you remember from a few weeks ago, we talked about and experienced Job crying out to God, crying out in anguish at his circumstances and in anger at what he saw as God allowing these things to happen to him despite his righteousness. We saw his angry response when his friends continued to try to convince Job that he must be being punished for some sin that he's just refusing to admit. Well, that has continued since the last time we read. The friends of Job have continued to try to convince him of the theology of the day, which was, if something's going wrong in your life, it must be your fault. Job refuses to believe that. And so today we have two responses of Job's to his friends' attempts to convince him. They come in the 14th and the 19th chapter. Now, there is a unifying factor between these two passages, and it's the reason that they were placed together for today. And that unifying factor is that each of these passages has just a glimmer of hope found in the midst of utter hopelessness. So let's listen in to Job's two responses. First, from chapter 14. For there is hope for a tree. If it is cut down, that it will sprout again, and that its roots will not cease. Though its roots grow old in the earth and its stump dies in the ground, yet at the scent of water it will bud and put forth branches like a young plant. But mortals die and are laid low. Humans expire, and where are they? As waters fail from a lake and a river wastes away and dries up, so mortals lie down and do not rise again. Until the heavens are no more, they will not awake or be roused out of their sleep. Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, and that you would conceal me until your wrath is past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If mortals die, will they live again? All the days of my service I would wait until my release should come. You would call, and I would answer you. You would long for the works of your hands. And now we jump to chapter 19. Oh, that my words were written down. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that an iron pen and with lead they were engraved on rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see on my side, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. What I see in these two passages is glimmers of hope in the midst of utter hopelessness. It's like searching for a needle in a haystack. Hard to find, even when you know it's there. But here it is. Here that hope shines through in these speeches that are full of despair. In chapter 14, Job first tries to find hope in the metaphor of a tree sprouting again if it just gets the scent of water. But then that metaphor fails him as he remembers that humans don't operate in the same way as plants. Humans, he decides, are more like riverbeds that go dry and never return. But then we see it. We see that little glimmer. Job wonders if maybe God could send him to Sheol, to the underworld for a while, to conceal him, to put his hand over Job long enough to let God's wrath pass by, to let the suffering come to an end. And when it happens, when it's over, when the suffering has passed, Job hopes that maybe then God, who seems to have forgotten him, will remember him again. Maybe God would call his name, and maybe Job would hear and answer, and maybe Job would long once again to have God in his life. Maybe. It's hard to see, but the hope is there. And in chapter 19, if we read a few verses before the section before, we would see that what we read comes after a long lament, where Job is identifying, is pointing out that all the people close to him have chosen to turn away from him in one way or another, that no one is there to offer him the support he needs. He even goes as far as to include God in the list of those who have abandoned him. And our reading today started with the request that those complaints, those laments, be written down in a book and even carved into a rock so that they will survive the test of time. Nothing is going to take away his pain, his anguish, his frustration, his anger. But even in that, Job utters the phrase, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that even if all else is destroyed, even if Job is only hanging on by the skin of his teeth, he knows that he will once again see God, and that God will once again be by his side. Let me be clear here. Nothing has changed for Job. He is still suffering. His friends are still no help to him. His support system has completely failed him. He is still angry at God. He is still confused and lost. His world is still upside down. And yet, even against all that, deep in the core of who he is, a little flicker of hope still burns. A confidence in God's goodness has taken root in Job's heart and mind, and even all this has not been able to extinguish that flame. Even all this. I want to tell you the story now that I alluded to at the beginning of my sermon. So I again invite you, if you need to tune out for a little while, as to avoid unnecessary pain. I want to tell you the story of what happened to my first grown-up world boss, the Reverend Brent Dugan. Brent was the pastor of the Community Presbyterian Church of Ben Avon, where I first served as the director of youth ministry. Brent had been the pastor of that church for 18 years, and he was beloved in that community. He had been a staple in that community, declaring God's unconditional love for all of God's children. Now, as I said, I'm not going to go into any details, but in 2006, a series of events led to Brent losing his ability to understand his incredible worth and value, and he ended up taking his own life. As you can imagine, this was an incredibly horrible moment in the life of Brent's family and in the life of the church family. As I said, Brent was dearly loved, and everyone in that community would have been willing to support him and love him through the circumstances that led to his death. The pain was unexplainable. The suffering was unrelenting. We all felt hurt, sad, confused, angry, and yes, even hopeless. It was so hard to see that someone who had spent his whole life making sure others knew they were loved no matter what, died not believing that for himself. Well, one of the things that Brent had said in the letters that he left for people was that he did not want to have a funeral, as he didn't think that he deserved it. But this was something that his family and community just simply could not honor. We had to celebrate his life. We had to declare God's love for Brent. We could not have the end of his life have the final say. So despite the deep level of hopelessness that his family, that his church, and that his presbytery colleagues felt, we all gathered together to celebrate Brent's life, to comfort each other in our pain, and to declare God's promises for Brent and for each one of us. And the part of that service that will forever stick in my mind and heart was what I believe to be about 60 clergy members, it may have been more, who came in full clergy robe and white stoles and processed down the aisle of that church in honor of Brent. Those clergy, in my mind, came together that day to say that even in this hopeless situation, the hope of God will never be extinguished. They didn't come thinking they could fix anything. The damage was already done. They didn't come thinking they could explain it or weigh or make anyone feel okay about it, for that would have been impossible. They came to sit in the hopelessness and declare that hope still existed. I think this is what is going on in these two moments with Job. As he sits in the hopelessness, he has moments of remembering that the hope he has in the promise of God's presence in his life is not completely gone. Friends, when have you felt hopeless? Are you feeling that way right now? Job shows us that we can live that way, that we can be real and honest about feeling hopeless even if we are followers of God. But the good news from Job today is that hopelessness does not get the last word. Hopelessness does not get the last word. God gets the last word. The hope of God still lingers in the background even when we struggle to see it. The hope of God sticks in the center, in the core of who we are, even when we struggle to believe it. The hope of God cannot be completely put out, no matter how much the circumstances of life might try to do so. God's hope is greater even than hopelessness. And that, my friends, is good news. Amen.